Something is moving through the South China Sea right now. Something big. Something that does not move this fast unless the people giving the orders have decided that time is running out. The USS Tripoli, an 844-foot amphibious assault ship weighing more than 45,000 tons, is cutting through the water at speeds that have surprised even experienced naval analysts. It is flanked by two Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers. Satellite imagery from the European Space Agency captured the formation last weekend near Vietnam's Phu Yen province, midway between Vietnam and the Philippine island of Mindoro. The wakes trailing these vessels are unusually large. That is what happens when a warship of this size is told to stop cruising and start sprinting. Open-source naval analyst M.T. Anderson tracked the movement in real time. His assessment was blunt. He wrote that they are moving with purpose, bringing with them a major integrated air and missile defense umbrella as they sprint toward the theater. He called it a heavily protected offensive posture. Not a patrol, not a presence mission, a sprint toward a war. The question you need to understand right now is not just what the USS Tripoli is. The question is what the United States government has decided it needs to do, and why it has decided, at this exact moment, in this exact week, to pull one of its most powerful mobile military platforms out of the Pacific and point it directly at the most dangerous waterway on Earth. To understand that, you need to understand what has happened at the Strait of Hormuz over the past 17 days. And once you understand what has happened there, you will understand why every financial market on Earth is watching that 21-mile stretch of water with something close to terror. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated air campaign against Iran. The operation was called Epic Fury. It targeted Iranian military infrastructure, nuclear facilities, and Iranian leadership. Among those killed in the early hours of the campaign was Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Within hours of his death, the world changed, not metaphorically, literally, physically, in ways that are now costing ordinary people across Asia, Europe, and the Americas real money every single day. Iran's response was not an attack on a military base. Iran's response was to close a door that the entire global economy walks through every 24 hours. On March 2nd, a senior commander in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps made an announcement that sent shockwaves through oil markets, insurance companies, and the finance ministries of 30 different nations. He said simply, "The strait is closed. Any vessel attempting to pass through the waterway will be set ablaze." He was not bluffing. Within 48 hours of that announcement, tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, which had averaged 24 vessels per day, collapsed to 4 ships. 3 of those 4 were Iranian-flagged. The remaining commercial shipping world, tankers carrying the crude oil that powers factories in South Korea, refineries in India, power plants in Japan, and supply chains across Southeast Asia, came to a halt. Over 150 ships dropped anchor on both sides of the strait, waiting for an all-clear that has not come. Here is the number that explains why the USS Tripoli is sprinting across the South China Sea right now. Because of your support, we are here today. It is because of your support that we keep creating this content. Whether your support comes in the form of inbox DMs, comments, or specifically through the premium subscriptions, it takes our work a long way forward. We don't have support from any platform. Our channel get demonetized not once, but twice, because they don't want we provide the insider news. Demonetization or silencing someone's voice is very wrong, regardless of the issue they are speaking on. We stand with freedom of speech. Please join us. With that, our membership subscription. We have already started producing more content for our paid subscribers, and eventually our goal is for half of our content to be for paid subscribers only. So become a part of the family, join, and subscribe. 20%. 20% of the world's daily oil supply passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Not some of it, not a portion. 20% every day. When that flow stops, the entire global energy system begins to run on borrowed time and emergency reserves. The International Energy Agency said it plainly in its March 2026 market report. The war in the Middle East is creating the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Crude and oil product flows through the strait have plunged from around 20 million barrels per day before the war to a trickle currently. Gulf countries have already cut total oil production by at least 10 million barrels per day. Global oil supply is projected to plunge by 8 million barrels in March alone. Brent crude, which was trading around $83 a barrel before February 28th, surged toward $120 within days of the closure. It has since settled at around $103 as emergency strategic reserves were released, but the IEA has been explicit that those reserves are a temporary measure, not a solution. The world's emergency oil stockpiles can cover about 20 days of normal Hormuz flows. After that, every scenario gets worse. Goldman Sachs modeled what comes next if this situation does not resolve quickly. In their base case, where Brent averages $98 through March and April, they have already raised their 2026 inflation forecast for the United States by 8 percentage points, and trimmed GDP growth. In a more severe scenario, with oil averaging $110 for 2 months, they raised the probability of a U.S. recession by 5 percentage points. Oxford Economics went further. They modeled $140 oil sustained for 2 months and concluded it would be enough to push the Eurozone, the United Kingdom, and Japan into economic contraction. They used the phrase economic standstill for the United States. These are not fringe predictions. These are the baseline stress tests being run by the largest financial institutions on Earth, right now, in real time, as the USS Tripoli races toward the Gulf. And it is not just oil. The Strait of Hormuz carries liquefied natural gas, aluminum, steel, fertilizer. 30% of Europe's jet fuel originates from or transits through the strait. 20% of global LNG supplies move through that 21-mile channel. Qatar declared force majeure on its gas contracts on March 4th. Qatar's energy minister warned openly that if the war continues, other Gulf producers may be forced to halt exports entirely. He did not mince words. He said this will bring down economies of the world. Countries across Asia are already feeling it. Vietnam has oil reserves estimated to last less than 20 days. Pakistan and Indonesia have roughly 20 days. Around 80% of all Asian oil imports pass through the Strait of Hormuz. China, which imports roughly 40% of its oil from the Middle East, had the foresight to stockpile crude before the war. But even China cannot run on stored oil forever, and Iran, which has quietly continued allowing Chinese-flagged vessels limited passage, cannot sustain that exception indefinitely without political cost. Japan's refiners, who source about 95% of their crude from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, and Qatar, and who receive about 70% of that oil through the Strait of Hormuz, have already asked their government to release emergency stockpiles. Schools have been closed in multiple Asian countries. Workers have been told to stay home. Governments are telling citizens to adopt fuel-saving measures in anticipation of what is coming. This is the world into which the USS Tripoli is sailing. Now let's talk about what the USS Tripoli actually is, because most people who have heard its name in the past 72 hours have no real sense of what this machine can do. It is not a standard aircraft carrier. It is something more complicated and, in some ways, more dangerous in the specific environment of a strait closure and coastal warfare. The USS Tripoli is an America-class amphibious assault ship. It is 844 feet from bow to stern. It displaces more than 45,000 tons. It can carry more than 700 Marines and all of their equipment. It operates F-35B Lightning II stealth jets, the short takeoff and vertical landing variant of the most advanced stealth fighter in the U.S. arsenal, along with MV-22 Osprey tilt-rotor transport aircraft and a fleet of attack and support helicopters. This combination of aviation assets, Marines, and mobility is why military analysts sometimes call it a lightning carrier. It does not need a runway. It does not need a port. It can project military force from open water directly onto a coastline, or provide comprehensive air cover for a maritime corridor under threat. Its two escort vessels are not support ships. The Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers traveling with the Tripoli carry the Standard Missile Series for layered air and missile defense, designed specifically to intercept the kind of ballistic missiles and drone swarms that Iran has been using throughout this conflict. They also carry Tomahawk cruise missiles capable of striking targets deep inland. The entire formation, the Tripoli plus its twin destroyer escort, is, as MT Anderson assessed, a package designed to both defend and strike. Not one or the other, both simultaneously. This is the fourth major U.S. naval asset now converging on the region. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group was already in the theater when this conflict began. The USS Gerald R. Ford was positioned to encircle Iran from the north. Now the Tripoli is racing in from the Pacific. The Pentagon has officially acknowledged the deployment, confirming that the ship will bring the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, roughly 200 floundered Marines and sailors normally stationed in Okinawa, Japan, into the Middle East theater. Military officials have been deliberate about describing the mission. The words they keep using are raids on Iranian territory, securing the Strait of Hormuz, rapid response combat operations. These are not peacekeeping phrases. These are the words you use when you are preparing for something that has not happened yet, but that your planners believe is coming. Here is the strategic logic the Pentagon is operating under. Iran has demonstrated over 17 days that it can effectively close the strait without using its navy. The U.S. military has already destroyed a substantial portion of Iran's naval surface fleet, but the strait remains closed. Iran can threaten and attack shipping using coastal missile batteries, drone swarms launched from its extensive Persian Gulf coastline, and mines. According to a March 9th media report, Iran has already laid fewer than 10 mines in the strait. President Trump responded on social media with a warning that if Iran did not remove those mines, the military consequences to Iran will be at a level never seen before. The USS Tripoli changes the strategic math in a very specific way. An amphibious assault ship carrying Marines and F-35Bs gives the United States the ability to conduct what military planners call literal operations. Close to shore in the contested coastal environment where Iran's missile and drone infrastructure is located, F-35B jets flying from the Tripoli's deck can reach Iranian coastal targets faster, with greater stealth, than assets operating from carriers stationed further out in the Arabian Sea. Marines aboard can be positioned for raids on Iranian coastal infrastructure, the missile batteries, the drone launch sites, the mine-laying operations, in ways that carrier-based air power alone cannot accomplish. The Tripoli's deployment is simultaneously a military tool and a geopolitical signal. It is the United States telling Iran, we are not just going to bomb your facilities from altitude. We are bringing the capability to take them apart from the coast. But there is another layer to this story that the mainstream coverage has largely missed. The deployment of the Tripoli has exposed a fracture inside the Western alliance that is just as significant as anything happening in the strait itself. The responses he received were not what he expected. Germany said no. Luxembourg's foreign minister called Trump's demand blackmail. He reminded the alliance that NATO's collective defense clause requires members to have been directly attacked before it can be invoked, and said plainly, none of us has been directly attacked. Japan declined. Australia declined. The United Kingdom has not committed. Germany's foreign minister asked publicly whether Germany would become an active part of this conflict, and answered his own question. No, we will not participate. We want to participate in negotiations. China, which has the most to lose economically from a prolonged Hormuz closure, is navigating its own strategic calculation. Iran has been allowing Chinese-flagged vessels limited passage. China is also reportedly weighing allowing cargoes traded in Chinese yuan to transit the strait, a move that would fundamentally challenge the US dollar's dominance in global energy markets. Beijing has no interest in shooting its way through the strait alongside the US Navy. It has every interest in positioning itself as the indispensable power that keeps energy flowing for Asia while Washington manages a crisis it started. The alliance fracture is not a side story. It is the story beneath the story. The USS Tripoli is racing toward the Gulf in part because Trump found himself standing largely alone when he asked his partners to share the burden. Now consider the full economic picture that has developed in 17 days. Oil prices above $100. LNG supply chains under severe pressure. Qatar declaring force majeure on gas contracts. Insurance war risk premiums making commercial shipping economically unviable through the strait. Asian governments telling citizens to conserve fuel. Goldman Sachs raising recession probabilities. The IEA calling this the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Oxford economics modeling scenarios where $140 oil pushes multiple G7 economies into contraction. And the underlying reality that emergency oil reserve releases, the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve, held 415 million barrels as of mid-February, cannot replace what the strait normally moves. At normal Hormuz traffic levels, 20 million barrels per day, the entire U.S. emergency reserve would cover about 20 days of disrupted flow. Even if every major consuming nation releases reserves simultaneously, the math does not add up for a conflict that Trump himself has suggested could last a month or longer. Saudi Arabia has been redirecting some of its crude exports via the port of Yanbu on the Red Sea, using the east-west crude oil pipeline to bypass the strait. The UAE has been diverting oil via the Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline to the port of Fujairah on the Arabian Sea. But these pipelines combined have a capacity deficit of approximately 12 million barrels per day compared to normal Hormuz flows, and the Red Sea route faces its own risk. The Houthis, who have spent the past year attacking shipping in that corridor, remain active. The world's alternative routes are overwhelmed. The world's emergency reserves are finite. The world's alliances are fracturing. And one of the most powerful mobile military platforms in the United States Navy is sprinting across the South China Sea at 18 knots. What happens when the USS Tripoli arrives changes every scenario on the table. If its presence, combined with the carrier groups already in theater, is enough to deter Iran from attacking commercial vessels, or enough to provide meaningful escort coverage for ships attempting the transit, then the economic damage begins to reverse. Oil prices fall. Supply chains restart. The worst recession scenarios get taken off the table. If Iran decides to test the Tripoli's arrival with escalation, if it launches coordinated missile and drone strikes against the naval formation, or against port infrastructure in the UAE, Bahrain, or Qatar, or if it moves to expand the minefield in the strait, then the conflict enters a phase that none of the current military deployments were designed to manage without significant ground force commitment. And if the USS Tripoli is ultimately used to support marine raids on Iranian coastal infrastructure, the scenario that military officials have described as one of its potential missions, then the conflict that began on February 28th with airstrikes on Iranian leadership has taken a step that no U.S. administration since 2003 has been willing to take. Boots on the ground in a country of 90 million people, in a terrain that has defeated every occupying power that has ever tried. The satellite image that captured the USS Tripoli and its escorts cutting through the South China Sea is a photograph of a decision. Not just a military decision, an economic decision, a geopolitical decision, a decision about what kind of world comes out of the Strait of Hormuz when this is over. The UNCTAD report on the Hormuz crisis said something that deserves to be read slowly. It said, reducing risks to global trade and development, including environmental risks, requires de-escalation and safeguarding maritime transport. The IMF has warned that every 10% increase in energy prices in 2026 is expected to raise global inflation by close to half a percentage point. These are not abstract numbers. These are the costs being measured right now in grocery bills, fuel prices, and manufacturing costs in countries that had no role in the decisions made in Washington and Jerusalem on February 28th. The USS Tripoli was last tracked, transiting the southern South China Sea at 18 knots north of the Riau Archipelago, approximately 420 miles from Manila. It is moving with purpose. It is carrying Marines and stealth jets and Tomahawk-armed destroyers. And it is heading toward a 21-mile channel where the entire logic of the global economy is currently being tested by an adversary that has decided it has nothing left to lose. Whether the Tripoli's arrival reopens that channel, escalates the conflict, or produces a negotiated off-ramp that no one has yet announced publicly. That is the question on which the financial future of billions of people now depends. The world does not run on good intentions. It runs on oil. And right now, the oil is not moving. The warships are. There is one more dimension to this story that has not received the attention it deserves. It concerns the specific moment the United States chose to pull the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit away from the Pacific and send it toward the Persian Gulf. The 31st MEU is not just any military formation. It is the United States military's primary rapid response force for East Asia. Based in Okinawa, Japan, it exists specifically to respond quickly to crises involving the Korean Peninsula, potential conflict over Taiwan, or regional humanitarian disasters. Every analyst who covers the Pacific theater has noted the same thing in the past week. Moving the 31st MEU to the Middle East creates a temporary but real gap in the Indo-Pacific. A gap that China has noticed. A gap that North Korea, which fired 10 ballistic missiles into the sea in the past 48 hours, has also noticed. Kim Jong-un's missile launches were not random. They were a message. When the world's attention is fixed on the Strait of Hormuz, when America's Rapid Response Pacific Force is being redirected toward Iran, the window for provocations elsewhere widens. The United States is fighting a three-dimensional chess match with pieces it does not have enough of. This is the strategic overextension that some of Trump's own senior officials reportedly warned him about before the February 28th strikes were authorized. A source close to the administration told Axios that some key officials were reluctant or wanted more time. The source said Trump ultimately said he just wanted to do it. And the same source delivered an assessment that has been quoted in financial circles and foreign ministries across the world. He grossly overestimated his ability to topple the regime short of sending in ground troops. That assessment sits beneath every decision being made right now. It explains the Tripoli's deployment. It explains the demand to allies for warships, demands that were rejected. It explains why Trump bombed Karg Island, Iran's primary oil export hub, destroying more than 90 military targets there, while simultaneously announcing in the same message that he had chosen not to destroy the oil infrastructure, and warning that he could reconsider that restraint. It explains why a $10 million bounty has been placed on information about Mojtaba Khamenei, Iran's new supreme leader, who U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth believes is wounded and possibly disfigured from earlier strikes, but who has continued from wherever he is to issue orders and threaten retaliation. Khamenei's message to the United States has been consistent. He has said that attacks on U.S. military assets in the region will continue unless American bases are closed. He has not softened that position. He has not reached out through back channels that have been publicly confirmed. Iran's IRGC spokesperson stated publicly that most of Iran's weapons cache remains untouched, and that the missiles fired so far represent older production from a decade ago. Iran's newer, post-2025 production missiles have not yet been deployed. Whether that is a genuine strategic reserve or a propaganda narrative designed to sustain deterrence, the uncertainty itself is strategically powerful. No military planner can afford to assume it is not true. Meanwhile, in the financial markets, the reality of a prolonged closure is beginning to be priced in with grimmer precision. Petrochemical plants across Asia have begun cutting production of polymers as LPG and naphtha supplies from the Gulf have plunged. LPG used for cooking and heating, particularly in India and East Africa, is facing supply shortfalls. Food security analysts are watching fertilizer flows through the strait with alarm. The Hormuz carries nearly half of the world's urea and sulfur exports, both essential to agricultural production globally. A sustained fertilizer supply shock does not produce its consequences in energy markets or stock indices. It produces its consequences in food prices, and it does so with a 6 to 12-month lag, meaning the farmers who cannot access adequate fertilizer today will produce smaller harvests in the months ahead, and the populations that depend on those harvests will pay the price long after any ceasefire is signed. The IEA has already revised its global oil demand forecast for 2026 downward by 210,000 barrels per day. Not because the world wants less oil, because the world is being forced to use less oil by a military conflict that has physically prevented the oil from moving. Global observed inventories currently stand at more than 2 billion barrels, the highest level since February 2021. But those inventories are concentrated in OECD countries. The nations that need the oil most urgently, the developing economies of Southeast Asia and South Asia, are not the ones sitting on the stockpiles. There's a phrase that keeps appearing in the financial analysis of this crisis, unprecedented. The IEA has used it. One NCTAD has used it. The financial analysis firm Expat Wealth at Work called the March 2026 Hormuz crisis a fundamental shift that will reshape energy markets, supply chains, and investment priorities for decades to come. The Strait has been threatened before. It has never been physically closed like this, for this long, with this level of military enforcement. Every day the Strait remains closed, the bill gets larger. The disruption cost compounds. The alternative routes get more crowded and more expensive. The emergency reserves get smaller. The patience of allies, already fraying, erodes further, and the pressure on the USS Tripoli and on the decisions it enables grows more intense. The ship is still moving. It has not arrived. The outcome is still unwritten. What the satellite imagery tells us, those unusually large wakes trailing the formation across the South China Sea, is that the United States government has made a decision, not a defensive decision, not a posture of waiting. A decision to bring overwhelming force to a specific point on the map and to use it to change a situation that has, in 17 days, threatened the economic stability of the entire world. Whether that decision was wise, whether it was necessary, whether it comes too late or at exactly the right moment, those are questions that will be answered in the weeks ahead. What is not in question is the scale of what is at stake. The Strait of Hormuz is not a regional dispute. It is not a Middle Eastern conflict contained within its geography. It is the beating heart of the global energy system, and right now that heart has a gun pointed at it. The USS Tripoli is the answer the United States has sent. 844 feet of steel, 1,700 Marines, stealth jets that can be airborne within minutes, destroyers that can fill the sky with interceptor missiles. Moving through the South China Sea, moving with purpose. Moving toward the question that the entire world needs answered before the oil runs out, and the numbers on the financial models stop being theoretical. What the world does next depends on what happens when that ship arrives.